Do you know something that interests me? It's this topic in MMA when a guy starts to go on a serious role and we just go crazy sometimes, and I admit it, we do go crazy, and we get to this point where it's just, there's no one in the world that can beat this guy, he's unbeaten, he's invincible, and then suddenly out of nowhere, pop on the chin or gets caught in a submission like Fedor, and it just changes the whole landscape. And I've noticed seems to be the case with Jon Jones right now, and I'm not going out saying Jon Jones is all hype. I think Jon Jones has done a tremendous job in the weight class that he's in, which in my opinion is probably the toughest weight class. I think he's just destroyed guys and beaten guys, and very convincingly. And when you think about guys like Rashad Evans and Machida and Hua and Jackson, these are guys that have all fought each other and had very close fights. Yet Jon has gone out there and had these very one-sided fights with them. But it makes me think about who is the person to beat Jon Jones, and is Jon Jones going to be that guy that stays unbeaten for his whole career, if that's possible? I'll give you my personal feeling. I'm not one of these people now that subscribes to that theory that, no one can be beaten, because I've seen it many a time, even in MMA and in other sports, where a guy, is invincible, and then suddenly someone just pops up and dominates the guy. I mean, I remember it with Royce Gracie. I remember when Royce Gracie first, when the UFC first came into being, and Royce Gracie came out there and did what he did. I remember a lot of people thinking that Royce Gracie was invincible, and then Kazushi Sakuraba came along. I remember this with Fedor, and this wasn't that long ago. I remember people thought Fedor was never going to get beaten, and then look what happened. He lost 3 fights in a row. I remember people thought this about BJ Penn, and the same thing happened. I mean, it's an interesting sport, so it makes you think, what could happen? Who could eventually be the guy to beat Jon Jones? And this isn't a hater video where I'm praying for his downfall and all of that. It's just an interesting topic. And I'd like to know what people out there think, what they believe, what they feel. Is he going to stay undefeated, or is there someone that's going to beat him? Or is it going to be one of those cases where, it's almost like Matt Serra and George St. Pierre, where he just gets hit with a shot one day and then he goes down? You never know. If there's a fight where that could possibly happen, it would probably be the Dan Henderson fight. I mean, I think that's an interesting fight. I could see why people would favour Jon Jones. I could see why. The reach, the more diverse striker, I could see them putting youth on his side. Dan Henderson's cardio isn't always the best. He's known to gas sometimes, and those are things that could work against him. But on the other side of it, Dan Henderson is a fucking warrior. He's got that Manny Pacquiao mentality, in my opinion. A guy that will move forward and he will take shots to the chin. And I don't see Jon knocking him out. And if Jon did, that would be incredible. But with Dan's chin, that would be interesting. And all Dan would have to do is just get inside or get within Jon's reach and start landing those heavy bombs. I mean, that could completely change things right away. And Dan is one of the guys that he doesn't carry that mentality. He doesn't get caught up in, oh god, I'm facing this guy, Dan will just go out there and do what he wants to do, and that might be a big part of the style that can beat Jon Jones. But what if Dan Henderson isn't the guy that beats Jon Jones? Who else is there? I've heard a lot of people talk about Alexander Gustafsson, and he's looked alright. I think he's looked pretty impressive, but I think he's quite susceptible to wrestlers. Phil Davis beat him, or ironically enough, a guy that Jon used to train with many, many years ago. And I think Jon would give Gustafsson problems. I think the reason why we all say it is because of Gustafsson's reach. But I would also like to see more of Gustafsson, and I'd like to see him at least, beat 2-3 more guys before before we start saying this is going to be the guy that slays Jon Jones. Who else is there? I remember a lot of people talking about Gegard Mousasi, and how can I put it? I like Gegard. I enjoy watching him. I enjoy his fights. I think he's a very good fighter. But I think that, how can I put it? I don't think Gegard has beaten enough top level guys just yet for me to think that this is a guy that could do it. And I also think Gegard, like Gustafsson, is susceptible to wrestlers. He fought King Mo Lawal, and King Mo just took him down at will. And I think that could come into it. And I think there's a size advantage in Jon's favour. Jon's 240. Gegard is trying to put weight on to be, bigger and bigger. Gegard naturally is a middleweight, so that comes into, that for me comes into it, especially when you are going up against a very good wrestler. So who knows? I mean, Gegard, you never know. He could completely just dominate his next 6 fights and change things. So that makes me think. And then you think outside of the weight class, because he's beaten a lot of guys within his weight class, unless someone starts to come up, and that does happen. I mean, you think outside of the weight class, a lot of people want to see Jon Jones and Anderson Silva. I think that would be an interesting fight to watch. I think that's a very 50-50 gimme fight for a number of reasons. Anderson Silva is incredible. But, on the other hand, Jon has the size and reach advantage and the wrestling advantage. And I don't see Jon leaving himself open to submissions in the same way that Chael Sonnen did. And if Jon gets him down and he starts dropping those elbows, that's going to be very interesting to see how Anderson deals with that. But then again, you have to take into account the mental game, and this is where I think Anderson could beat him. Jon idolizes Anderson Silva. Any interview he's done where he's talked about Anderson Silva, you can see it's like his childhood hero in some respects, and I think that could play a huge factor in the game. We saw this with George St. Pierre and Matt Hughes the first time they fought. I think it could be very, very similar if they fought, in the UFC for at least. Give me 2 minutes, hold on. And then you think, well, what if Jon goes out of the weight class and becomes a heavyweight? Is there a guy at heavyweight that could beat him? And I think that him fighting at heavyweight would be an interesting challenge for him for a number of reasons. If there's a guy that I think that could beat him at heavyweight, I think Cain Velasquez would be an interesting option. I think style-wise, it's very interesting. Also keep in mind that the guys at heavyweight carry a lot more weight. Jon's got to be able to take a punch from a heavyweight, and I think his chin would come into question if he fought at that weight class anyways. So, I've rambled on long enough and probably made zero sense to any of you out there, but let me know what you think. Write some comments, and also, before I get going, I want to do a Q&A video. I talked about this a few months ago before my thing crashed down, so any questions you want to ask, whether it's MMA or pro wrestling related, put them down. When I get enough questions, I will eventually do a video responding or answering the questions. So let me know what you think. Rate, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all very soon. Take care.